Chapter 4, Section 6 is triangle congruence. CPCF stands for corresponding or matching corresponding parts of congruent figures. And if you have two figures that are congruent and you pick the matching sides, they will also be congruent. So corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. So right here we have this side equal to this side equal to this side, and the angles are congruent. So by side, angle, side, we know the triangles are congruent. So to figure out AB, these are corresponding parts. So AB will be 18 miles. Next one, these are both 30 feet. These are both 19 feet. And these angles are congruent. So your triangles would be congruent by side, angle, side. So to figure out JK, it's going to be a corresponding part right here. So that would be 41 feet. And with our proofs, we're going to prove triangles congruent just like we did yesterday. And now we're adding one step. After we get the triangles are congruent, we're going to say the pieces are congruent. And you'll see right here, we're trying to get pieces congruent. So this step right here will always be triangles are congruent. So we have two bisect statements in our given. And I'm going to shorten that a little bit to bisect, bisect. Well, if QPS is bisected, then those angles are congruent. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And if these two angles, or if QRS is bisected, then those are congruent. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. And that is by the definition of bisect or angle bisector, whichever one you prefer. So these angles are congruent and these angles are congruent. We don't have anything else in our given, so we have to look at our picture, and we can see right here that PR is congruent to PR by the reflexive property. And then we can say triangle QPR is congruent to. Now if I pick QPR, you have to pick your next triangle in a certain order. That will match up with SPR. And our reason for that will be angle, side, angle. So up to that point is exactly the same thing we did yesterday. And now, since we have these triangles congruent, we can say that PQ is congruent to PS by corresponding parts congruent. And sometimes I like to write corresponding parts congruent, and I think some of your teachers might have you write CPCF. And either one of those are fine. Corresponding parts are congruent or CPCF. On the next page, proof B, we have a bisect statement, and then we have x, y, is congruent to YZ as our given. So XY is congruent to YZ. And then we have YW, so this bisects XZ. Since that's bisected, we can say XW is congruent to WZ by the definition of bisect. And then YW is congruent to YW by the reflexive property. And then we can say the triangles are congruent, and I'm going to say triangle YXW, and you need to match your triangle in a certain order. If I pick YXW, that would be YZW. And then those triangles would be congruent by side, side, side. And now, since we have the triangles congruent, we can say these pieces, XYZ, this angle then will be congruent to that angle. I'm sorry, XYW is congruent to angle ZYW. If you want to, you can write CP, CF, and sometimes I like to write corresponding parts are congruent. Just explains a little more. Either way is fine though. Proof C, we have a midpoint statement as our given, and that's all we're given. J is the midpoint of KM, so we can say KJ is congruent to JM, and those are congruent. JN is congruent to JL, and that's by the definition of midpoint. And I think I need to take a look now at what angles I'm trying to get congruent. LKM, so we're trying to get that angle congruent to NMK. So if we could get these two triangles congruent, then we could do corresponding parts. So I'm going to put a 1 right there and a 2 right there. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 by the vertical angle theorem. And now I'm going to say triangle LKJ is congruent to triangle. Now see how I went along this base to the angle that I'm looking for? We're going to have to match that up, so we're going to do NMJ, and that will be by side angle side. And now, since we have the two triangles congruent, we can say angle LKM is congruent to angle NMK. And I think some of the teachers will have you write CPCF, and some of them might have you write something like corresponding parts are congruent. And proof D, we have NO is parallel to MP. Whenever you hear parallel, you should think something about some angles. And angle N is congruent to angle P as our given. So those are equal. Well, we are given the parallel, so we're going to use it for something. So I'm going to put a 1 right here and a 2 right here. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 by parallel lines, alternate interior angles. We don't have anything else in our given, so we have to look at our picture, and we can say that MO is congruent to MO by the reflexive property. And then we can say triangle NOM is congruent to triangle. Now, since I picked NOM, that's going to match up with PM0. And our reason here is angle, angle, side. And then once we have the triangles congruent, we can say these pieces match up. PO is congruent to MN. So this side right here is equal to this side right here, and that's corresponding parts congruent figures, or corresponding parts are congruent.